We're going to welcome the man who co-founded the UFC, instrumental in the sale to Zuffa, current CEO of Combat America's Campbell McLaren. Campbell, welcome to Inside MMA.
Thank you very much.
Now,
always a pleasure to be here.
Listen,
it's Combate America.
Okay.
This is America. Learn how to speak Spanish.
Yeah, I'm Canadian. I'm still learning to speak Canadian. Okay, so you helped them sell to Zuffa.
No, I had nothing to do with that. I never would have sold the UFC.
I was going to say $2 million.
I
2001.
attempted to buy the UFC in this last go round. I would have never sold the UFC. I was pushed out somewhere around 22. You know, because I'd really created all the controversy, all the marketing. I was glad to see Pat Miletich on the show. He called me the marketing genius behind the UFC. So when I said banned in 49 states and there are no rules, that's what launched the UFC. That and two heroes named Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie, right? But I never would have sold the UFC. I worked for a company called Bertelsmann, BMG, big corporate entity. Very uncomfortable with the controversy. But, you know, the UFC is something that I always have seen almost as if it was my own child, right? I had so much to do with the beginnings, working with Rorion and Art Davie and David Isaacs. But, you know, I always felt a sense of pride and a sense of ownership. I would have never sold, ever.
Yep.
Not for any amount. It was too important to me.
What was the craziest story you can recall from UFC 1, the beginning? There's so much chaos going on. I heard just
what's the craziest one?
Well, I mean, there's so much crazy, but what do you remember most?
Well, you know,
from a
I heard
personal
on the show, Royce, and I love Royce and Ken, amazing. Both still fighting, both doing the best ratings Bellator does with my guys, right? Okay. So Bellator's become not quite the retirement home for the UFC, but something like that. Anyway, Royce was talking about, was there biting? No biting. He asked that question at the fighter meeting. He said, you know, what about the biting? And it's his brother, Rorion, stands up and goes, we are not men. We are not animals. We are men. There is no biting. So that's as far as the rules.
Well, it happened,
you know?
Gerard Gordeau, though, right?
Absolutely.
In the main event against Gracie.
What were the biggest mistakes they made in the beginning? What would you say? Okay.
I don't. Have you seen?
No,
UFC
I know, but
1?
I mean, what would
Did
you
you
say?
see the on-air commentary?
I mean,
Bill Wallace, Bill Super Moron Wallace.
But wait a minute. What about Jim Brown, though? Brown, a legend. How did he become a member of the broadcast team?
Well, Jim Brown made a lot of sense to me because sports writers then were absolutely not writing about the UFC. They've only grudgingly came to the party in the last couple of years. Sports Illustrated, anyone with Time Warner has ignored MMA until they couldn't, and essentially they couldn't ignore it because of Ronda. But back then, no sports writers were writing about the UFC. But Jim Brown was a football legend. He sort of forced them to pay attention to it. So, you know, I knew he wore the Muslim hat, and I know he pissed everybody off, but I thought having Jim there and that type of athlete, and it was Jim in the beginning who kept saying, the only one that can stop the Gracies is if you bring in a big wrestler.
Yeah.
You know, he got that very early
There
on.
were no wrestlers in the first UFC, and was that because of the Gracies that they didn't want any... I mean, I know in many ways it was an infomercial for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as well.
Oh, you know, come on. They kicked everybody's ass. I mean, it wasn't... Rorion never said, oh, you can't have a wrestler. Okay. You know, Mark Schultz was an Olympic gold medalist, Dave's brother, right? So he came in, but it took quite a bit of convincing. Dan Severn wanted to do it. Mrs. Severn called me.
What about Mark Coleman?
And Coleman, too, but they
Mark
still
Kerr?
took a certain amount of convincing, right? And Ken and Royce came to the first one.
Right.
Right? After the first one, everything changed because people got to see it in action, right? And they saw what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu could do. But they also saw that maybe it wasn't the Mad Max end of the world thing that I said it was going to be, right? And I think anyone with a grappling ability saw what they could do in the UFC.
Right.
So if you didn't show up for the first one, it got a lot easier to show up for the second one. You got to give it to Royce and Ken.
I want to go and jump in because I know we're running out of time, but two good people stayed. Big Joe McCarthy, Joe Silva, early on wrote you a letter saying, hey, listen, I can clean this up with great matchmaking. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. I mean, Joe really served as my assistant.
Yeah.
Joe used to fill out, this is back in the day before the internet, he would take a yellow legal pad and he would write notes on every page. and give me the yellow legal pad. So you'd have like 47 pages of notes. Joe's always had, Joe's sense of matchmaking and mine are a tiny bit different. I think in some ways, Joe is always out to make every fight be a world-class fight, which is a fabulous thing. Sometimes you want fights to be entertaining, though. And you match-make differently.
Quick word on your Combate Americas. What are you trying to accomplish? Combate Americas.
You got to say it with
Hispanic
feeling.
Combate Americas.
Passion.
What are you trying to accomplish with that?
Well, I think what we're doing, UFC is a style of fighting, right? But it's not the only style of fighting. And I think what you see in Combate Americas, August 11th is our next one. And we're on Fight Pass if you don't speak Spanish, if you want to watch the English commentary. What you're going to see is a faster-paced style of fight, more of a stand-up style of fight. The martial arts for Puerto Rico and Mexico and U.S. Hispanics really is boxeo, right? It's boxing is the martial art. So you're going to see a little more of that. And we've been doing 8 fights per show. 6 of the 8 are ending in finishes.